flying the American flag today, and many a friendly foreign vessel as well, whether she's a naval unit or a merchant vessel, fighting ship or supporting craft, large or small. Whatever her mission, she stands out to sea with full confidence that she is navigating safely and by the best route toward her destination. The men who sail her entrust their lives to the accuracy of charts that serve as nautical road maps of the vast oceans. They rely upon instruments that help them find their way under the skies, and they place their confidence in publications and reports that give up-to-the-minute warnings of changes and hazards in the maritime picture. For every vital service to navigation, mariners look to one major source, the United States Navy Hydrographic Office, familiarly known as Hydro. In day-by-day operations through service in peace and in war over more than 125 years, the Hydrographic Office has earned the trust of seafaring men. How it won this trust is an important chapter in the rich history of the United States Navy. In 1800, just as today, the ocean navigator needed reliable information on routes, currents, landmarks, port facilities. Often he couldn't get it, and so he turned to foreign governments and private dealers to buy charts and instruments that sometimes proved to be deficient. To fill the great need of American mariners for trustworthy information and accurate instruments, the Secretary of the Navy on December 6, 1830, established a depot of charts and instruments in Washington, D.C. In charge of the forerunner of the Hydrographic Office was Lieutenant L.M. Goldsborough. In 1834, he was succeeded by Lieutenant Charles Wilkes, one of the great names in the history of navigation and hydrography. The following year, a lithographic press was installed at the depot to begin the production of nautical charts. But fresh, reliable information was needed, and to begin the giant task of getting it, Lieutenant Wilkes in the spring of 1837 led a party to survey George's Shoal and Bank off the Massachusetts coast. The data he collected were incorporated on the first engraved charts published by the Depot of Charts and Instruments. But this was only the start. For the very next year, 1838, he took command of the United States Exploring Expedition, the first hydrographic surveying and scientific expedition to leave our shores under the authorization of Congress. For 4 years, the expedition ranged over the globe from Madeira to Brazil and far south along extensive portions of the mainland of Antarctica to show it was a continent. There, he surveyed and charted the coasts of what we know today as Wilkes Land. The survey fleet moved up through the Pacific Islands, then over to Japan and China, back across the Pacific to Wake Island, the Hawaiian Islands, and Alaska, and finally into the Columbia River. Adding in special voyages made by separate vessels, the expedition had spun a great web across the oceans. What really mattered were the survey results, which were published as a series of 87 engraved charts over a period of years. Wilkes did his job so well that even today the information he collected remains the heart of many current nautical charts. On many of them, credit is still given where it belongs. In July 1842, a new era in hydrographic science began when Lieutenant Matthew Fontaine Maury was placed in charge of the Depot of Charts and Instruments. Later that year, the Secretary of the Navy introduced bureaus in the Navy, one of which was the Bureau of Ordnance and Hydrography, with the depot under it as its hydrographic branch. The growing importance of hydrographic work was further emphasized in 1844 when a new building for the depot was erected and occupied. Lieutenant Maury was now ready to begin his masterwork, laying the foundation for the continuing systematic hydrographic activities of the United States Navy. Here was the raw material of a modern hydrographic service. The logs and sailing records of men of war and merchant vessels, containing observations made aboard thousands of ships all over the world, facts about ocean currents, winds, air pressure and temperature, water temperature, depths, and other natural phenomena. What Maury did was to organize an extensive reporting system that channeled all these observations into a central collection point at the depot. With this information, Maury issued an important series of wind and current charts between 1844 and 1861 that shortened ocean passages by weeks and saved ship owners millions of dollars. These charts were supplemented by sailing directions and distributed to naval and merchant ships. By 1849, skippers on the North Atlantic run were following sea tracks laid down by Maury in a series of track charts and the wind and current charts. These were the forerunners of today's pilot charts, which still proudly point out their origin in Maury's early researches. In 1853, at Maury's suggestion, an international conference in Brussels, Belgium, worked out a uniform system of reporting weather observations at sea. Maury himself officially represented the United States. The following year, the Secretary of the Navy directed that the depot of charts and instruments be called the United States Naval Observatory and Hydrographic Office. By the time Maury resigned from the Navy in 1861, he had been in charge of the depot for 19 years. Along with the countless honors, degrees, and titles he earned, he was to go down in history as the pathfinder of the seas. The Civil War saw the office put to the test of military necessity. Nearly 600 vessels active in the war required prompt servicing with charts and navigational instruments, and hydro came through. After the war, an act of Congress in 1866 officially clarified the status of the office. There shall be a hydrographic office attached to the Bureau of Navigation in the Navy Department, the law began, and went on to define its functions and separate it from the Naval Observatory. In 1868, the office started the weekly Notice to Mariners, the latter still one of the most important nautical periodicals. In 1871, the Office of Hydrographer of the Navy was created to direct the growing activities of hydro. Important among these were hydrographic surveys undertaken in the next few years in the Pacific and Caribbean areas. 1883 saw the first pilot chart published by the Hydrographic Office, and its first effort to engrave its own copper plates from original surveys. As its functions grew, the office felt the need to move closer to the mariners it served. So in 1884, branch hydrographic offices were established at Boston, New York, Philadelphia, Baltimore, New Orleans, and San Francisco. Always on the alert for new technical advances, Hydro in 1907 started a broadcasting service by which mariners who sighted anything unusual or hazardous at sea could immediately radio word of it to the office. The office, in turn, would then issue warnings to interested naval or merchant marine activities. One major hazard at sea that concerned the office at this time was ice, the threat of icebergs drifting into the shipping lanes. Following the sinking of the Titanic in 1912, Hydro was instrumental in establishing the International Ice Patrol to guard against ice dangers. 1917, World War I, and again the Hydrographic Office played a vital wartime role. Original surveying work had to take second place to the critical need for more charts and publications for wartime purposes. In 1918, the office prepared the first American aviation charts. 2 years later, the first notice to aviators appeared. To promote hydrographic science around the world, the leading maritime nations formed the International Hydrographic Bureau in 1921, with the United States adhering through both hydro and the Coast and Geodetic Survey. The very next year, the United States Navy made a great contribution to the field of hydrography by developing the first practical sonic sounding machine, an instrument that probes the ocean depths and records a profile of the ocean bottom. With this equipment, the office has led the world in deep-sea soundings and bathymetric charts. There was another first in 1922 when Hydro introduced aerial photography and hydrographic surveys off the coast of Cuba. Naval air activity picked up so rapidly that in 1925, Hydro began to prepare aeronautical publications, and the first naval air pilot was issued. 2 years later, the first upper air pilot chart was published. In 1930, the Hydrographic Office looked back proudly on 100 years of service, then celebrated by setting up a branch office in Honolulu to provide better service in the Pacific area. There, service for peace quickly became service for war with the attack on Pearl Harbor in 1941. During World War II, Hydro even supplied pilot charts for all lifeboats, giving an extra chance of rescue to the survivors of torpedoings and other casualties. The demand for charts rose to about 40 times the normal pre-war rate. In 1942, hydrographic survey ships sailed right along with the fleet, advancing across the Pacific war zones. These ships were specially fitted out to conduct surveys and make charts on the spot to meet the immediate changing needs of the fleet. Meanwhile, back home near Washington, the office moved into its own new hydrographic office building to step up its wartime activity. In 1944, the peak year of World War II, the office produced over 43 million charts. The war demonstrated the increasing importance of oceanography. And in 1946, the Hydrographic Office was made a central agency for collecting and coordinating all oceanographic research for the government. Various bureaus of the Navy, the Coast Guard, the War Department, and civilian agencies were to work through the office on oceanographic matters. 2 years later, 2 oceanographic survey ships were specifically assigned to conduct surveys for the office. Whether at sea or ashore, Hydro has always done its job where it found it, from action during the conflict in Korea to research operations in the Arctic and Antarctic, to participation in the activities of the International Geophysical Year as part of the Navy's contribution to world knowledge. From its early pioneering surveys, the office has applied its vast experience to a single important purpose, the development of the finest hydrographic service possible. The office today does its work on many fronts simultaneously. It is ever alert to the need for maximum maritime safety. Through its efforts, the high seas are as safe as timely information can make them. Whether it's a report on a derelict in the steamer lanes or a buoy that is out of order, Hydro gets the information out to the mariners who need it at all times, at all hours. To meet the new demands of modern ships, the office is continually advancing in the field of navigational science. Among many other current activities, it seeks to simplify navigational tables, create new and improved instruments, and develop accurate data on the Earth's magnetic field. The office continues to expand its work in oceanography, the science concerned with the sea itself, how it behaves, and what is in it. This work ties in closely with the growing importance of undersea operations and the emphasis on atomic submarines. Today, the Hydrographic Office works everywhere, below the surface of the oceans, on the surface, and above the surface as well. Naval aircraft operating over areas of importance to the Navy need aeronautical charts and special services, and Hydro supplies them. From the very beginning, the making of charts has been a major function of the office. Behind these charts lie a million details of observation and calculation that add up to an intimate portrait of the oceans. A portrait set down with great care and precision in the chart construction rooms at Hydro headquarters. Under the direction of expert cartographers, draftsmen and technicians pin down and make permanent the information that has been so painstakingly gathered, sifted, and checked. The charts, reports, and studies of the office are of such a special nature that special printing facilities have been developed to produce them. The latest in lithographic and camera equipment stand ready to do precision reproduction in quantity. Once Hydro's products are printed, the problem is to get them into use as speedily as possible. Out they go to central distribution offices in Scotia, New York, and Clearfield, Utah, and from there to branch hydrographic offices on the Atlantic and Pacific coasts, Panama, Hawaii, and Japan, and to air navigation offices, as well as to Hydro sales agents throughout the world. Through these channels flow over 50,000 individual charts and publications, adding up to an inventory of over 50 million copies for distribution around the world. It's a long way back to the time of the sailing ships when the office first opened its doors. In those days, a vessel carried a handful of basic charts. Today, a modern aircraft carrier needs over 24,000 items of navigational printed matter and gets them thanks to Hydro. And thanks to Hydro, the navigational needs of our Navy and Merchant Marine have been well met for over 125 years. The Hydrographic Office today stands as the finest institution of its kind in the world, safeguarding navigation on, over, and under the sea for the men, ships, and planes that form the backbone of our commerce and national defense.